Q. Try to relax and let your ghost hosts take you on a ride through their fearful abode. Along cobweb-covered corridors and hilariously horrific hallways, into chambers which tremble with wall-to-wall screams, and through libraries with books of your nightmares and dreams. You'll float up into attics adorned with antiques, through grotesque Gothic gardens which echo with shrieks.
The Alton Towers Haunted House opened in 1992. It remains one of the biggest haunted houses ever made. But has your mind ever wondered what else was hiding in the dark?
Oh, come on, get to the interesting stuff.
Ahead of a big transformation this year, we talked to the original creators.
Right in your face.
That is fantastic.
And answer the questions that keep you awake at night. How did it work? Why is there a toilet? So join us behind the scenes for the making of the Haunted House.
After it was very apparent that Chessington was doing well, Madame Tussauds realised that the theme park business was going to really, take off in Britain. So we needed to look for somewhere else, and we looked around, looked at all sorts of different sites, and the long and short of it was we bought Alton Towers. Now it was very, very apparent that we had to make some big changes quickly.
The Tussauds group had a particularly good group of people who had been the leads redeveloping Chessington, from being a zoo into Chessington Wild Adventures. Yeah. Particularly John Wardley as the creative lead on that. And that same group was sort of shifted into Alton Towers on acquisition to look at how the park could be developed. And another part of that jigsaw was obviously to bring in a marketing director. Alton Towers, you've got to bear in mind, it had a bit of a roller coaster history in itself. I mean, it had been the original UK theme park when it had been started in the 1980s, the corkscrew roller coaster, and had unparalleled success, had grown and grown and grown. So by the time you get to 1990, Alton Towers had been dropping in visitation. It had been bringing in a lot of second-hand or even third-hand roller coasters like the Thunderlooper or the Beast, which were some of them leased rides, just to try to maintain numbers. But by doing that, had become very, very focused just on thrill seekers, and had literally lost the family market.
Alton Towers proudly presents two spectacular new themed developments for 1992 to delight and thrill the entire family.
I revamped the Rapids ride, put a runaway train in there, and thought, well, a dark ride. Let's build a dark ride using the same basic philosophy that I'd employed with the Bubble Works, right, which was basically intriguing and amusing and enchanting people.
I thought it was quite important that we stuck to something where people would immediately get what it was. If you know Alton Towers and the unique, very emotional and emotive landscape of Alton Towers, actually like natural place in the world to have the UK's most haunted house.
Alton Towers challenges you. You remember as a child that strange old house you used to pass on the way home from school?
There was no doubt that we were going to build a haunted house at Alton Towers. And of course, with the towers and the gardens and the landscape, this is the perfect setting to discover a haunted house. The ride needed to have high capacity, it needed to have high appeal, but we wanted it to have a bit of edge. We wanted it to make people think this is something rather different. Well, we obviously needed a design team that would be able to imagine the kind of concepts that you were putting forward. I did some rough layouts and talked to Keith Sparks about the sorts of effects that we wanted.
Pipes that squirt porridge and man-eating desks and all sorts of
daft things, really. And that's all part of our development as a company. We came from the world of puppets and magic, where the unexpected has to happen. It all has to be original, new, crackpot, really. It's a wacky sort of world.
So everything that you can see here is what survives of the Spark Studio archives. Keith's studios from about 40 years of work in entertainment, very generously donated for a book project I've been doing on Keith's life and work for the last 8 years. So this is the most research that's ever gone into the Haunted House. What we do have is things like original scripts, his work diaries. Most of the photographs in this video have never been seen before. They're Pepper's ghost effects, run off a Laserdisc original model video, and the original script that was presented to Alton Towers, Keith Sparks' own copy.
A year at Sparks was like 5 years in the real world. You crammed so much in, and there was so much creativity, so many projects, so many different disciplines coming together, and yet quite a small team delivering them. We'd be imagining a job in one room, someone would be drawing it in the next room, and it would be out there in the workshops being built.
We can have nasty, slimy things coming up out of the swamp, the whole bit.
I think John Wardley had a very clear vision for what he wanted the Haunted House to be, and was very much a John and Keith collaboration in terms of the vision.
Huge claw hands, and they're about 4 or 5 foot. Huge hands like that.
Right.
With John and Keith working together, they're very different. John has those big creative ideas and visions. This is how the journey's going to go, the story, how it all comes together. Sparky, he was great with his team on the gag. This is where you go around the corner and this comes zipping out at you.
Mm-hmm. Keith would sit with the client and go off on this wild, frenzied journey of imagination. And then Keith would work with the design team, the designers and the technicians, and those silly ideas would suddenly start to take physical shape. You'd start to see how you could turn them into a gag, into a deliverable effect.
Keith not only had the talent to bring those to life, but would add that little kicker that just gave you that unexpected, that added that extra bit of magic.
So these are the storyboards from April 1991 as presented to Alton Towers, what you were going to discover inside the haunted house.
We wanted to start in people walking through this rather peculiar environment that was actually tilted at an angle to put people off balance and make them feel rather disconcerted.
Once you get on board, and as you went along the ride, things get stranger, and it's a journey into the imagination or a nightmare. Things get weirder and you see these strange apparitions. Some of the concepts that were decided, beams of light breaking through a room possessed. You come through the hallway and this demon seems to appear out of thin air. You ride through the mouth of hell into a tunnel of flames. That's a bit weird, isn't it? You come down a corridor and a phantom flies over your head. These grabbing hands break through the walls to reach you.
You were going to explore the house and eventually end up in the gardens outside that were overgrown and rather sinister.
The great thing with working with somebody like that is Keith had no boundaries. I mean, there weren't boundaries to his craziness. So, you'd quite often sit there thinking, how on earth are you going to achieve that? But in design, you need people like that. I'm the opposite. I already know where the boundaries are there. So when I'm exploring ideas, I'll go up to the boundary and then kind of go, I don't know what I can do beyond that. Keith didn't have those boundaries.
And the fact that he was actually grounded in practical stuff. He was a skilled carpenter and he knew all of the construction processes. So in his mind, I think he could see a route from crazy idea to reality. It's just that he wasn't inhibited by it.
Then, of course, you've got to make it work practically, which the guests never have to think about. Yeah. They just assume that they're exploring a haunted house.
A lot of the people working on the team had no benchmark. Nobody had done that yet, certainly not in the UK.
And we started to build a formula so that we could forecast future projects. And I remember distinctly, based on the really crazy outline back of a fag packet brief for Alton Towers, and when I sort of ran it through this very embryonic model, it said the cost is going to be X. And I remember distinctly sitting down with Keith and saying, okay, Keith, so I've done what you asked me to do, and we've applied this new kind of modelling technique, and it's going to cost X. And he said, Ruzzers, slight problem. We've only got half of that. But don't worry, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Don't worry, Ruzzers, don't worry. And that was good. But we did it.
Of coming up with visuals and eventually building a model of the entire ride.
With Don Owen, who's an exceptional model maker. Don, a designer in his own right.
Yeah, very much.
The model was a genius stroke, and it's one that throughout my time in the industry, we've always come back to. The model brought to life way more than just storyboards can. Exactly what people would be getting as an experience.
So it really was a predecessor to what is now a lot of the 3D modelling that gets done in the computer domain to try and identify where all the problems are, the sight lines and stuff like that.
We could put an endoscope camera in it and video it, and actually you could ride the ride, which was, in those days, that was the closest you could get.
Yes, the presentation took place back at Spark Studios in Colchester, and they had the model covered over and they made the big reveal. And immediately I wanted to get in there, and sure enough it was bringing to life in 3 dimensions the things that I got in my head just purely as images.
The fiendishly weird occupants of the haunted house are just dying to meet you and your family.
After the initial concept pitch, Sparks were asked to add another twist to the ride and develop the concept to avoid it being too scary to a family audience. And so together with John Wardley, we came up with this idea, which really brought the ride into its own, which was that we wouldn't tone down the big scares, but we would add a twist.
Yes, it was very important that there should be humour. We didn't want this to be horrific. We didn't want any child to come out crying, or have nightmares.
You needn't be frightened. All they want to do is make your visit a happy and relaxing one. The only problem is that their appearance is enough to scare anybody witless.
This is a fact from Keith and his design team explaining that concept, which puts it really nicely. I think this sums up the whole ride. The idea behind it should be that these ghosts, whilst unfortunately frightening and ugly, can't really help being that way, but want to be friendly.
It was always meant to be a little bit fantastic. That was where we were trying to always make sure we got it as mainstream as it was possible to be in terms of appeal. But that doesn't mean boring. You can still get the highs and lows and the emotions and the laughs and screams.
And Keith Sparks was the perfect person to do this because he had a real schoolboy sense of humour, filthy sense of humour at times. And therefore we were able to create a ride that wasn't horrific. It didn't have negative emotions to it. All right, it was a haunted house, it was spooky, but at the same time it was a bit of fun.
To meet you the man, I want you to meet the man who's entirely responsible for that and many other rides. He is ride designer John Wardley, and here he is lurking in our spooky set.
Together with John Wardley, who was an absolute legend in front of the camera, we used that model in a lot of the publicity. It was worth every pound that model cost to make, just to have somebody on national television.
This is just one scene out of 10. This is the finale of the ride.
I've always, I suppose, my show business background, you have to have the big finale. Yeah. You save the best to last. And so we devoted a huge amount of the budget and, of course, the space to that finale area.
Part of it you ride through and you can come all around here and various things happen. You have to jump up out of the dark. A tree crashes down on top of you, these heads come up out of the darkness. And then at the very end of the ride, just as you think you're safe...
Oh, this is my bit, isn't it?
This is the bit you like. You do the sound effect.
I'll do the sound effect.
Right.
That is quite revolting.
You can come and make that noise every day, right?
But eventually we decided, right, that is it, and away we went.
Within these flickering flames, my face seems to exist. Not only in your mind do my features now assist. And everything you see in this haunted residence is just imagination getting better of your sight.
So we're now in what we call the pre-show, which sets the scene before you actually get on the ride. And we wanted it just to be rather strange and disorientating. So you've got the doll's house. When you looked inside the doll's house, you could see a little girl walking around inside, a miniature figure. In the fireplace, there was a strange face that appeared in the flames. The rocking chair rocked of its own accord. Pages of the book turned, and you thought, this is really weird, what is going to happen? And you didn't even know that it was going to be a ride that you were about to use. You had no idea what was going to happen.
And what I always liked about Keith was, he and his team generally stuck to gags that were reliable. They were old school a lot of the time. But with old school, whether it was a Pepper's Ghost, which actually most customers think is hugely sort of high tech, but of course they're not, or just a jump out of your get out, actually they never failed to work. And it was that pre-show, from my perspective as the marketing director at the time, was just knowing what the killer image is. And the interesting thing with the Haunted House was it wasn't actually one of the main things in the ride. It was the little doll's house with the ghostly girl running through it, and the face in the fire, which actually was Keith Sparks' face.
Take 93. Are your furtive, frightened minds playing tricks inside your brain? No, the ghosts you see are products of a mind that is insane.
Right, throughout the whole ride, there is a network of elevated gantries and walkways so that we can watch what is going on. So even though you think you're touring the haunted house entirely on your own, you're being watched by people that are up on these gantries, so you don't misbehave when you're in the haunted house. And it also enabled me, when we first developed the ride, I used to stand up here and just watch people's reactions, see where they were looking at different points in the ride and how they were reacting to different effects, so that if we needed to make any changes, we could do. Oh, and also it's useful for the staff to be able to quickly get around to any part of the ride without having to walk near the track.
So construction started with a big space to fill, and that meant some big ghosts.
We'd always have a big meeting. Everyone would go to the meeting with Keith. Then he'd be left more or less to my imagination. Well, this is called a maquette, which is a scaled down version. And then by measuring the maquette and scaling up, you can then draw the outline and then start chopping the corners off and modelling back in from there.
So that was also from the swamp. That was like the face is split open.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes, yes. That again would be to scale.
Look at that.
Don was brilliant, as a cottage industry, produced some amazing work, really micro detail and some really great sort of big full-size stuff as well.
Sparks used to build all the props, and then a lorry would turn up, we'd offload everything, and it'd be our job to paint them. So I certainly remember painting a lot of the props for the haunted house. It was just the anticipation of this big lorry turning up and not knowing what was going to come out of it.
This scene is interesting in the fact that is a mirror, that is a mirror, so we can hide one of the giant ghosts. These are the two ghosts that are hidden behind the mirrors, so you can't see them as you're coming through. They then spring into view.
Behind the mirrors was balanced the lighting with the front. It would appear to be totally empty until the lights go out and this huge character appears floating right in the middle. Back in the dark, it would reappear around here and offering you a cup of tea. Because why not?
I didn't mean to frighten you.
But I'll just show you how huge. If I stand next to this and see how big it's up close, that big, and that's just massive.
This is what's known as a trommel, which is a revolving tube, which is extremely disorientating. And when you're going through it, you really do think that you're tipping over.
In the script for this bit, it's quite interesting. The idea was for huge flames and laser fires as described in the script. But of course, that's hard to do, especially with technology of the time. So this is a bit of cool value engineering. Create that same effect with two giant mirror balls rotating and then lit red with a lot of smoke. It creates this moving fire laser effect. Well, that's how it was done in 1992.
Look around this scene with the lights on, you'll notice the hidden artworks in the walls. These painted details, when lit in black light, would originally blend in with the scenery and keep the scenic budget spent where riders' attention was focused the most, without losing on the sidelines. A technique developed by Sparks with their artists at Rex Studios.
That was when the scenic guys were discovering what you could and couldn't do with the UV.
I'm coming to get you.
It was a subtlety of using not just straight UV colours, but adding tungsten colours, but in very small amounts, just to sort of give subtle effects.
And then as we got used to used to playing around with it, we got to the, well, we can use tungsten and UV in the same scene. Can't do that because the white light will wash out the UV light. But if you did it in the right measures. A good example of that is probably the spider corridor.
So this is the beginning of the spider scene as it was originally. You'd come through this archway, this is the start of the sequence. You'd hear this voice just whispering, "Are you scared of spiders?" Then a tiny little spider would light up just here. So you dodge that small one and straight away you get hit by a slightly bigger one. An even bigger one over here. And then a bigger one there, and then you come round this corner and you see this.
Big.
So, yeah.
It is big. The spider scene was one of the things that everybody remembers in the... We thought, well, what is it that everybody's a bit frightened of? Well, the idea is that you see little spiders that get progressively bigger and bigger and bigger, but you don't expect anything as big as this, which then makes a terrible screeching noise and kind of lurches.
A surprise from the archives is how the original intention was for the spider to drop down from above, as seen in the model and described on camera by Keith.
We time it, as you know, you come through, the spider goes, drop, okay?
Mm-hmm. It's not known if it was built to do this in the workshop, but by the time it was finished on site, the mechanism dropped the spider's body forwards instead.
When you're sitting there and you're talking about how this sort of, you want the whole body to drop and feel like it's going to squash you, and then the head comes down and takes another chunk out of you and all the rest of it. It was fast. It's a huge prop. Like Keith, he would literally have the punters picked out the car and spat out and land in another car if he could possibly find a way of doing it.
So the spider scene, as you can see, originally looked pretty cool. A lot of the scenery has been removed over the years, but with the lights on, you can see just how simple the scenery really is. And that's because it relied so much on theatrical techniques to build anticipation using timing and lighting. to give the impression of more happening than there really was.
I mean, that was a vast space. And if you look at that from a costing point of view, then you start measuring the walls and going, all right, we need scenery there, there and there. And it basically turned into some stretched cloth, some spiders on some springs, and one big prop that was lit. And that is partly the genius of Keith. You were always looking at the surfaces from the rider's point of view.
Keith's view was that a ride is about you directing where people look, and you use sound and light to misdirect them away from the blank wall that you can't afford to paint. Well, let's not show it to them. Let's make them turn that way and look at the thing. And I think that's how we were able to turn a little into a huge amount in terms of value on that ride.
The concept of this scene, it was called the Flying Ghost Corridor. It was an effect that Keith Sparks had always wanted to do, but the idea was a ghost would fly over your head screaming as it came by.
And you get to the end of the corridor and you clearly look to where the ghost has just nipped round the corner expecting something to happen, and he's been splattered on the floor. The first generation of it was built along the lines of a gravity kind of roller coaster track, I want to say. The inspiration behind it was clothing moving around the factory, which is one thing. And the lift system was built out of hinges riveted to a belt or something like that, if I remember rightly.
And it works something like this. Hidden behind the set wall, the clutch engages the lift with the motor to raise it up to a point, in time for the car to come round the bend when the ghost free falls down the rail lit in UV. More on all that later.
This is the flying head scene because all you saw were these faces that were whizzing around on top of you. Some of them are on hinge dials, some of them go round, but lit in black light, all you see is the face spinning round and screaming as it goes. And it's not until you stand up here and you watch the rate at which the cars are going by and look that this thing is whizzing round. Then you begin to think, yes, if there was a counter that counted the number of times that thing that moved in its lifetime.
And I remember reading in your book how it's inspired by Uncle Frankenstein.
That's right.
At Barry Island.
Yeah, that effect was inspired by an effect in the Ghost Train at Blackpool.
Oh.
And then one of the effects in Uncle Frankenstein's Scream Machine at Barry was then copied by Blackpool without permission for their Ghost Train. Right. So, you know what kind of... This is the finale of the ride, the garden, the overgrown garden of the house.
The garden scene, you know, I mean, it's such an epic set, you know, it was massive. I remember the first time I walked into that scene being blown away because it had already been built, so we were really there just to paint it.
Sinister garden that was lit with UV, that had great big UV cannons hidden around the place, so the background, you know, a lot of the far walls were hidden, painted with UV to give a sensation that there was something there, but all the near ground stuff was done with tungsten lighting, coloured lighting.
is the beginning of the finale where the cars speed up. The finale's now changed. And the whole idea of this scene was that everything that you saw wasn't what it seemed. This seemingly innocent column whips round and reveals this monster, and all sorts of creatures and ghouls were appearing out of things. The rocks would be possessed. Very cool.
As you can see, the finale was very dark for cameras in the 90s, but thanks to the lucky find of this videotape, we can explore the original finale behind the scenes for the first time.
Final effect of the ride, the final shock before you actually got back into the station, where the giant circle shot out right in your face.
That's not going to be able to go
That's not fully adjusted, John.
Building the ride's big animations was a major part of the project. Keith was persuaded to take on a new engineering team for the project, but with the animations already built on site, many of them were experiencing trouble.
Up behind the fingers, and then a little bit of top, a little bit of front light. As they move, you'll get the huge
Is that
shadow.
going to be able to... That's not going to be able to go
That's not
through
fully
there, is
adjusted,
it?
John.
So you're going to have to...
Yeah,
Right.
that's not adjusted yet.
So R&D sometimes meant rebuild and dismantle, not research and develop.
Yeah.
But that was a challenge of the timescale. You know, Alton Towers, Tusos were very clear that this project had to start then and finish then. It was a fixed budget.
Sparks drafted in Mike Seaton and his team, who'd worked with them on countless attraction projects before, to improve the animations in time for
Alton
opening.
Towers trouble, and the spider.
Thanks with the mouth.
And the repairs going on.
Yes.
Look,
There they are.
crumbly, crinkly, crankly wall. And
Flying head.
flying head. So they are 92.
That's
big,
the first
They're
one.
the big buggers. They were the ones, one having a teacup, and the other one had a big claw. They were humongous.
You can build stuff like they do for films to work once, but when you've got to make it and you don't know how long it's got to last, you've got to over-engineer it.
Operational cycles, you know.
You've got to over-engineer
Millions
it.
of cycles.
And we soon learn you can't build something lightly.
Most of the time, you know, the team managed to put it back from the brink and deliver a gag.
But spider, swamp monster, and flying heads, I think, will haunt Graham and I for the rest of our dotage.
The flying heads were a great success. The swamp monster, that was a little bit dodgy. And the flying ghost corridor, of course.
There was an issue with the flying ghost in as much as, in some way, the cars wouldn't relate to the timing of the ghost coming through. So ultimately, there were three. Thinking, I've got to copy the first one.
To achieve the timing, 3 ghosts now ran in sequence on the track, with one released at the top, one waiting on the lift and another running the track.
And we got it working. We did get it working, but it was so complicated. Trying to get the consistency of the ghosts going down there was very, very difficult.
Another adjustment just before opening was the mouth of hell was thought to maybe be too scary for a family audience, so Alton Towers asked that it be toned down. The original effect would have been a UV glowing effect with smoke like a fiery tunnel, but it was covered over just before opening.
The preparations for your visit are nearly complete. The supernatural occupants of the haunted house are getting the spiders to spin their creepy cobwebs, helping the dust to settle on the furniture and the lights to flicker in a delightfully gloomy way.
When I first went and saw the ride lit and walked the ride for the first time lit, I was just blown away. Obviously, I knew the models, I'd seen the work in progress on site, but everyone's working in work lights. You're part of the discussions all the way through. When you walk that for the first time, lit, you kind of think, wow.
When everything is ready, they will open their doors to visitors. We dare you to be one of them.
Alton Towers, mate. Looking forward to all those rides?
Oh yeah, going on that loop-de-loop.
It's the people that were doing all this. They've pushed the cars and completely knackered up all the blocks.
The opening day was a nightmare. It proved to us that this really was haunted. Everything had worked perfectly for the weeks and weeks we were commissioning the ride.
We've had quite a lot of trouble with this, sorting this computer system out.
Yeah, the launch. That was one of my first major tests of how you can think laterally. We put everything up for the launch day. And the evening, literally the evening before, I'm sitting in my office. John and the technical director came in and said, we have a problem. Mm-hmm. And the problem was that the individual cars were shorting out. Mm-hmm. And that if you put too much load on them, they tripped down and stopped. The ride will restart shortly. Well, so what can we do? He said, we can only do this if you're limited to 3 people, and one of those people has to be a member of staff, so that when the thing trips, they have to press an override button so that the car can continue. And that's the only way we can do this. So this isn't going to look great. This isn't going to be brilliant, that you can only have 2 people and then there's a member of staff sitting there pressing a button. How can we make this look like we intended this to be the case? So I actually, in one of my rare bursts of creativity, asked whether it would be possible to get them all dressed up as undertakers, because obviously the final scene is the undertaker doing this. And I don't know how they did it, but the costume department in the operations team somehow managed to source, I think it was 16 undertakers outfits.
Philip Schofield and Michaela Strachan were on their way up to be the celebrities that cut the tape. We were all wrestling to get everything working and nothing seemed to be going right.
It's absolutely terrifying!
And so the next day, we literally launched the ride with Philip Schofield and the national media and all the other people that went on it and did it. All of them with a member of staff dressed up as undertakers, and every time the ride clicked out, they pressed the button and it carried on.
They thought, oh, there's claws coming into the windows.
Yeah.
Huge claws, it's Johnny Bailey.
I know you've had a bit... Thank you.
Oh, shut your mouth.
Philip Schofield did this brilliant broadcast, and it was absolutely a triumph of PR launch. But, I'll never forget the stress of that evening before, and how somehow the team, and it was a team effort, to do that, how the team pulled it off. But, the rest was history.
I think, ladies and gentlemen, it is about time to declare this magnificent ride
Mr. Gould. No, I don't like him. I don't like fun.
You may think I'm nerdy, you may think I'm mad, but hold it right there, I'm going to tell you all the changes in the opening year, because I've got the notes, which are pretty interesting. 10th of April 1992, going around the ride. It's very normal for dark rides to have the jiggery-pokery phase after it opens, fine-tune the effects and that sort of thing, and the Haunted House is no exception, and most of these changes are actually just very minor. There was a bit of redressing in the hallway scene with more detail added, very normal stuff. There's also some interesting ones though mixed in with these, which are more creative changes that kind of affected the fantasy feel of the ride, and it was felt that maybe the ride could get away with being a bit scarier and kind of remove some of the fantasy feel that was part of the concept.
Already the ride was off to a more sinister start with the addition of a skull and a portcullis. The main change was the toning down of the colourful look by removing or reducing a lot of the UV from the scenes. Effects that were previously more surreal, like the giant fingers, were repurposed as jump scares by relighting. The giant's goofy voice changed to a crack of thunder, same for the spiders, relit in tungsten light. The team would return in night shifts to take one effect out of action every night, repainting from its UV style into the darker colours, ready for reopening in the morning. The bridge monster you probably won't recognise because it only lasted a couple weeks. Didn't quite work as a jump scare and was replaced by the more familiar witch in the window.
But he's still in the ride. Up there, just moved to this scene, jumping out in this corner. And actually, you can see the mechanism is not lying as it was designed. So that would be the original angle when it was laying on the ground. And ever since, it's been repositioned.
There were a few areas where we went back and said, this needs to be a bit stronger. But, you know, I've now been in this industry 32 years. I've never been involved in the launch of a dark ride where everything and every effect that you were promised in the books at the beginning work the way that you hope they will. It always takes a little bit of refinement to get them to the finished article.
Actually, I don't feel frustration from that. I think we learned so much about process. And about how you push the boundaries, and to maintain that ambition to push the boundaries is really important. If you always take the safe option, and I don't mean that from a health and safety point of view, I mean from a design perspective, if you always take the safe option, you'll never achieve anything you're proud of. And I think it's always important to push the boundaries, and Keith was amazing as an innovator in not only pushing us down that road, but empowering us to as a team.
Dark ride, particularly a large-scale dark ride, you know, is a symphony of different things that have to come together. Every X seconds as the cars go through the ride, you know, the music has to trip, the effects have to trip, the sound and smell have to trip exactly the right level. And it is a theatrical production. And theatrical productions, you know, take that much more managing. That takes real talent, and it's both creative and technical. And they are much, much more difficult to deliver consistently than any other ride that you'll find in a theme park. They really are.
And when you look at that as a ride and when it was built, and when you look at what we built it with, what our tools were, and, you know, back in the day, what we had at our disposal, and to think that we even got it, whatever the percentage is, 95% right, it's a huge credit to anybody that was involved in it. And if we got a bit wrong, we got it wrong because we got too close to the boundary.
And this is something you learn about seasonality in the business, because I had a house that's something just down the road from Alton Towers, and I'd be looking out the window counting coaches going up the road. And for the first few days, we didn't get the numbers. And I was like, I don't know what I could do more. We'd had all this publicity, you know, we massively driven, you know, train sale, everything. But the numbers didn't come in, and I literally thought, I don't know what more, but I've obviously failed here. Time to start thinking about, you know, moving on. And then I remember the duty director on, I think it must have been the Tuesday after Easter Monday or something like that. And he said, phoned me up and said, we've got 20,000 people on today. And then after that, we did 20,000 people every day for the next 2 weeks.
Wow.
And that was it. We just knew, turned round the sinking ship. Alton Towers started going up straight to straight. And importantly, you know, exactly what we wanted. We got that family market back.
27th of May, 1992.
A second round of changes happened ready for the summer season, this time seeing the end of the giant fingers, which it was thought didn't work so well as a jump scare.
I wanted to change the fingers because I guess they weren't scary enough, and I had to convert the fingers into scary heads with rags on that would pop out. But I had to do it at night because during the day, obviously, the ride was open.
The spider scene too was relit in strobe lighting, and the giant spider rebuilt with new animation.
That was supposed to lurch at you. Well, it's so huge. We didn't realise it was going to be as big as that. So in the end, instead of it lurching down, we thought it was safer for the film to kind of menacingly kind of rock around.
The new engineering saved the spider, but the next scene was still proving trouble with the flying ghost. So, did it ever get seen by the public?
Did it work? Yes, it did. It worked for about 3 seconds one day. For sure. I was there.
You saw it.
I saw it work. Yeah.
I did see it working, and when it worked, it was absolutely blow your socks off. Yeah? You literally came around the corner and it came hurtling towards you. You thought, that is fantastic. The trouble was, 9 times out of 10, it didn't exactly catch that right moment.
Put it on site, it worked well, and then it would stop. And you just go up there, get it going, work fantastic. You come back in the morning after you've had a sleep, and it was not working again. And you watch it, and well, isn't it working?
Each ghost was different, even though they were all sculpted the same. They had, one was slightly heavier, one was lighter. They had cloths draped off them, which would cause different drag efficiencies. The bearings on one day to another would be different. So it just turned into a monster of parameters, a literal monster. Keith convinced himself that it could be done, and we literally threw everything at it. Sparks threw everything at it to try and make it happen, and it still didn't quite work.
No.
This is a ghost in a haunted house, in as much as it was an effect that was proving so unreliable when we were commissioning the ride that we scrapped it. So nobody ever knew that this existed, but the mechanism, the lift mechanism, is still here to this day, covered in cobwebs. So it's a real ghost.
You can see the trap here that the ghost was on this rail. It would have reached right around.
But it didn't really become a problem because we were able to do other things in the ghost corridor with things coming out at you and so on.
Though Keith Sparks had since left to start a new studio, his team were brought back to replace the Ghost Corridor with a new scene for the ride's second season.
A lot of that scenery's now been removed, but you can still make out parts of the flat set. Do you remember, John, the man in the bathroom?
Yes.
Which was up there?
Well, that was Keith Sparks' humour. It was all about farts and some lavatorial humour. So this is where the exploding WC, complete with suitable WC sound effects emitted.
That was the amazing thing about that project, was that it was an incredible collaboration of everybody involved, and lots of people behind the scenes, but in front of the scenes, John and Keith, two creatives who trusted each other. John as a client with an obvious creative genius himself, knowing what he wanted, and trusting Keith to help him get there.
I mean, looking back on it and hearing your enthusiasm and, being part of that, you only begin to understand what you were doing. At the time, we didn't really, we never knew these rides were going to become iconic or anything like that. We probably hadn't even sat there and worked out how many people were going to go through them. We were buzzing from the job we were doing, really.
Yeah. And all I could do was, as a very small cog, and I do mean a very small cog in that big project wheel, I was so proud of my colleagues and really proud of the boss, really proud of the chairman. Yeah, what a great job.
saw it from 92 to 95, and I was shocked, you know, when I came back and saw what had been done to my baby. Yeah. You know, it's why now we are so intent on putting it back in its rightful place. A good dark ride is a veritable huge orchestra, you know, playing the most complicated symphony. And the minute you start saying, oh, that effect doesn't work anymore, so we'll just turn it off, over time, that builds up to the point where you stop blowing people's socks off, and it becomes a ho-hum ride. The teams that work with it day in and day out don't see those slightly incremental creeping changes because they're up close. And that's when then somebody will, with desperation, will say, well, let's put a load of shoot 'em up lights on it and try and give it a new life. But even then it becomes ho-hum. I mean, actually, funnily enough, I went round Alton Towers with my quite grown-up kids and actually my parents a few years ago. And I went round, as my parents were in their 80s now, and it was the only ride, one of the only rides I could probably take them on. But I thought, well, I've been round this on work visits, but not really as a customer. And that was what really pushed me over the line to say, we really need to get this done now. It's time to do it. The vision, the aspiration is absolutely critical. We want to bring this back to being the best haunted house ride. And that is not, you know, something that is going to basically give the kids nightmares, but it's something that's going to entertain people, give them the odd scare, the odd laugh, and be immersive, would be true to Alton Towers, you know, to believe that this particular haunted house could not be anywhere else other than Alton Towers. And the characterization that we have, which is originally descended from that little doll's house, that will now take you through a journey that will make a lot more strength in the narrative even than the original haunted house, leading you to a truly amazing finale. That is what I'm really excited about, and I'm absolutely confident that we'll be able to deliver.
Haunted houses don't exist, do they? Do they? You'll be frightfully sorry your tour has to end, as out of the gloom down the steps you descend. You just toured a mansion with strange ghostly powers, with a unique address, Haunted House, Alton Towers.
Yeah, there are other rides, mate. Oh, there? Yes! Great. Bye!